crazy driver. And I'm from Winnipeg, so we have a different way of driving respectfully. So I just noticed we have a police officer here, and I want to make a citizen's arrest on my sister. And hopefully I'll get home safely. Secondly, but more importantly, are the young people that have been presenting and being a part of this whole conference. I am so impressed and so proud of you guys for stepping up and stepping forward. You're a real inspiration to some of the older ones to keep going, and I really see my role supporting the work that you're doing, and it's just an honor and privilege to be a part of that and to witness that and to be here today. What I'm here to talk about is the value-based services for sexually exploited youth, and part of the introduction of who I am and what I'm doing lately is working with the Canadian Women's Foundation on a national task force for human trafficking of women and girls in Canada. I'm not here to talk about that today, only because I just started. I don't even have business cards yet, so I'll be working in Winnipeg, but commuting to Toronto and certainly across the country. And there's many people in this room. I can't wait to talk to you because there is a very important role you play on a national scale, certainly. So I hope I have a chance and an opportunity to touch base before we leave today, and I'll see some of you tomorrow as well. I'm here to talk about my experience working in Winnipeg and working for an Aboriginal organization, a nonprofit, non-mandated social service agency that provided family resource support services for Aboriginal families. And one of the ways in which we did that successfully is really a relationship-based organization. So always looking for the gifts and the strengths within people and building on that as a starting point, and not a deficit-driven model on service delivery. So that made us unique from a whole bunch of other people and really affected how services were delivered for Aboriginal families. And so early on, it's an organization 25 years, and I was there 13 years. One of the locations we established is a safe house for sexually exploited youth. And that really came from the youth themselves, with our relationships in our youth department, recognizing that there's way too much exploitation happening in the city of Winnipeg. And the city of Winnipeg is also unique in that it's the Aboriginal capital of Canada. So the history of Aboriginal people and having our young people, our young women, really is, they have all the risk factors really against them. So it's about making sure that we set up the right types of resources for them. So I'm glad I planned my presentation this way, because I get to what can you do and what can we do, and you guys already covered all that all day today. So I will be able to make it within my time, I'm sure. One of the things as I'm going through, before I start my presentation, is I want to just build on what Jennifer Richardson was sharing about the Manitoba strategy, the Manitoba sexual exploitation strategy, and that there was a lot of work done by the grassroots level for many, many years. Very much what's happening in this room with creating synergy in this room, that it really was the grassroots people and individuals coming together, wanting to do something, wanting to address exploitation of our kids that are happening blatantly on the street and behind closed doors. So they worked for many, many years to really work in partnership, and there's really kind of 4 key partners that I see that are essential to any kind of strategy development and any kind of work around looking at having positive outcomes. And that first is the political will. We're lucky in Manitoba to have a government that in 2011 invested over $8 million on sexual exploitation services alone. In comparison to other provinces, that's like way up here versus, while Ontario is $2 million over 3 years, it's still a great start, but a long way to go as well. And some provinces have 0, so Ontario is in a better position. So having the political will that brings the resources, and also with systems, brings the systems at the table that are prepared to make changes. So that's how we can use the Child Welfare Act, and that's how we can work with police and have them freed up in order to be able to work on the issue directly. The second group are the NGOs, the organizations that are working on the front lines, whether they be shelters, whether they be organizations working with sex trade workers, community development organizations, youth-serving organizations, that they also need to be at the table and equally involved. The third are vulnerable communities. And in Manitoba, it's the Aboriginal communities and the immigrant refugee community, that they're also at the table, and that is a very critical piece that, and it was brought up earlier, that let's not do for, let's do with, and that's really important, and that's, I think, as well sets Manitoba apart. And experiential women, critical to the work of, again, any strategy development that's going to have positive outcomes for sexually exploited youth, or in this case human trafficking, that they need to be involved. There is a perspective and an experience and a lifetime of knowledge that they have that money can't buy, and there's a role and responsibility, and well, our responsibility to make sure that they are involved and at the table, and we're asking the questions. So today's presentation is about how all of those four partners can come together, work together, and create value-based resources for sexually exploited youth. And I'm going to talk particularly about the Safe House to give you some insight to the lives and the healing of Aboriginal women and girls. So in Manitoba, and this is, Jennifer presented this as well, 70% of our sexually exploited youth are Aboriginal children, 80% female, young as 13, actually we've heard as young as 9 in our Safe House. 70% are kids in care, and that's a huge risk factor. 90% have a history of trauma, substance abuse, high rates of self-harm, suicide, and the average grade level completed is 7. So you get a mental image in your mind at this point about who she is, who that victim is. And then to add, being Aboriginal, certainly in Manitoba, and I believe across the country, and most studies have shown that it's Aboriginal women and girls that are victims of domestic trafficking. So why is that? And partly there's a whole bunch of reasons why, but I thought that this captured the reasons why the best. And I'm just going to read the end of this about the Aboriginal Justice Inquiry concluded that really the death of Helen Betty Osborne was, hang on, might as well read the whole thing now that I can't find it. The death of Helen Betty Osborne was a brutal expression of that violence. She fell victim to vicious stereotypes born of ignorance and aggression when she was picked up by 4 drunken men looking for sex. Her attackers seemed to be operating on the assumption that Aboriginal women were promiscuous and often enticed through alcohol or violence. It is evident that men who abducted Osborne believed that young Aboriginal women were objects with no human value beyond sexual gratification. So unfortunately, while this is in 1991, it still remains the case today for Aboriginal women across the country. So our girls, where have they been before they get to the Safe House? They've been lured by perpetrators to the internet, malls, social events, simply walking down the street, going to school, peers, and sometimes their own family. Perpetrators take on the role as boyfriend or daddy, and that is common within sexual exploitation victims, and take complete control over their lives, everything from what they wear to what they eat. They're exploited through the visible sex trade, so what you see on the street, and that's usually when they're older, and the invisible sex trade in drug houses and brothels, and are often moved from one house to another in Winnipeg and throughout the city. And they're often exploited as early as 9 years old, and that's really what happens behind closed doors. They all have criminal records, mostly assault charges and breaches thereafter, and most of the assaults occurred while under the influence and towards individuals that are trying to help. And not one charge that I'm aware of has been towards their perpetrator or offender. She is highly addicted to many drugs, whatever it may be. Limited unhealthy family involvement because they, for the most part, are kids in care. Low self-esteem and an overemphasis on their appearance. They're emotionally and mentally underdeveloped. Limited education. They're very childlike and really have difficulty following direction, taking initiative, building relationships with others, and fixated on making money in their appearance, and really believe that their perpetrators love them and now are in fear of their own safety. So the value-based service that I want to emphasize and use my last few minutes on is it's a home environment. So this safe house is actually a house, and it's not in an institutional type of setting. The sense of security is, there's a strong security, but it's not to keep them in, it's to keep the perpetrators out. So it's to ensure that they feel safe, that there's a non-judgmental attitude from other residents and staff, a harm reduction model rather than abstinence that can be harmful. Given their high addictions, harm reduction is really the only way you can go in a safe way with them. And really giving their power back by them making their decisions for their futures. So they drive their care plans. So they're not called case management plans, they're called care plans. That there's safe opportunities to address the victimization and the shame and guilt and blame that accompanies through activities, workshops, mentoring, and care, constant encouragement and support, high staff complement at times of vulnerability. So you triple staff it at between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. because those are their trigger times. And most of the kids, they're up all night and sleep all day. So you staff it when you need to staff it. Individual care plans include transitioning from the couch in their own bedrooms as much of the victimization occurred there, and that's important too. What we find with rural-based services is you got to go to bed at 10 o'clock, whereas working with these girls, you can't do that because their bedrooms are not safe places. So they have to work their way to owning their bedroom and feeling safe in their bedroom. So for a period of time, they all, like a slumber party, sleep in the living room. A no-give-up philosophy and approach to AWOLs through strong outreach and programs. So they're going to slip up and they're going to make mistakes, and it's about using those as learning opportunities rather than using it as a reason to evict them or give up on them. So the challenges, and this is the last part, is the victimization of exploitation through the sex trade really has long-term impacts. It's not something that is they're not going to be fixed or things are not going to be resolved in a year or two. It really takes a long time. And so the resources and the learning opportunities need to be there for the long haul. That child welfare needs to continue the practice of extending care to make sure that these safe houses after 18, that there needs to be legal remedies to prevent perpetrators from stalking residents. That happens often where perpetrators sit literally outside on the public street, just standing there or parked there, waiting for them to come out, or a form of intimidation. So a more response from police when reporting a child in need of protection and outreach services, and that outreach assistance, and that it also goes to funding. We're lucky in Winnipeg that we have our police service as part of the Street Reach team, and our vice unit are very active on the exploitation of addressing the exploitation of children. So in other areas of the country, that's not the case, unfortunately. So, and more awareness in the general public that it's child abuse and children are victims, that they're not child prostitutes and they choose to be there. And really a national strategy for all Canadian children with a component to address demand. Again, the demand, we have to talk about the demand, because if it wasn't there wouldn't be a business of buying and selling women and children in Canada. So thank you very much.